So I'm just going to switch it so all panelists can share. And then I'm going to share my screen.
So you wanted to everyone to write to all attendees, or is it okay if they write to all panelists only?
I think we can just leave it as
we can leave it. Okay. So I need to see the chat.
All right, Geoffrey, can you see the screen?
Yes, I can.
I see it also.
Right, Eleanor is right here next to me. I could also ask her.
And I can see participants.
Right. We have a few participants. Okay, so shall we start?
You can go.
I just have to broadcast, right?
Yeah, broadcast and people will come.
Okay.
Oh.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I see that our participants have begun joining the call. Welcome to this afternoon session on self-confidence and affirmation as the first webinar in a series presented by Women in Africa and Deloitte. So welcome as you're joining. We will just wait 1 minute to let everyone get into the room. We're expecting around several hundred participants this afternoon. So thank you if you're on the call already. And welcome if you're joining now. So this afternoon session will have 1 hour to get through some very interesting but also very broad topics. The focus of this program is to help support, empower, and develop women leaders across Africa. So with that in mind, we will go ahead and introduce ourselves. Okay, so this is Nicole Kelm speaking. I am a manager with Deloitte Consulting here in Congo, Brazzaville, and it's a beautiful day here. Thank you for joining us on the call. My background, I am a public health and development expert supporting our consulting teams. But I've also had the pleasure of being a military officer and supporting diversity and leadership programs both in the US, in Europe, in the Middle East, and now in West and Central Africa. I am also the lead for the Women in Africa support. So Deloitte runs a mentorship program as well as now this leadership series in partnership with the Women in Africa initiative. And I am joined by my colleague, Eleanor.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eleanor, and I'm really happy to be there. I'm a senior consultant in the training team in Deloitte, Congo. I'm also expert in gender, and actually I trained hundreds of women on media training and speaking in public. And yeah, I'm really happy to be there. You already are more than 100. That's amazing.
Yeah, so welcome again. And so just to give some instructions for the call so that you can participate, the goal is to have this webinar be a little bit more interactive. So we welcome you to please look at the slides that are on the screen in front of you, but also feel free to ask questions in the chat. Eleanor will be responding as we go, and we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the call. Don't hesitate to share your experiences, ask for advice. If you'd like to post in the chat your name, your organization, where you're from, that would be wonderful so we can get an idea of who is on the call.
And also this webinar is yours, so it really gives you the opportunity to learn, share, and transfer your knowledge. Don't hesitate to do some feedback to us. It's really interesting for us also. And notice this session will be recorded, and well, it started already on time and it will end on time. And all participants will be muted, so you're not able to speak, but as Nicole said, you can write on the chat you're really welcome to do that.
Great.
And now we are gonna start with this first step. So first we're gonna talk about how to gain self-confidence through emotional intelligence. I want first you to take a few seconds to think about how would you define self-confidence? What's self-confidence for you? And second question, what about, in your opinion, what are the qualities necessary to have self-confidence? So you can write on the chat, what would be your definition of self-confidence? What would be the qualities to get self-confidence? Feel free. Don't hesitate. Take some seconds to think about it. And if you don't have idea about this question, Samantha wrote that self-confidence will be to believe in yourself. Yeah, that's really, really good. Also, it would be authenticity, courage, self-love, charisma. That's also a very good answer. To be able to present your idea clearly, defend them well. Yeah, also assertiveness. We will actually talk about assertiveness. Trust in your abilities. Yeah, really right. Ability to articulate one's truth without fear. Yeah. Being calm, being self-assured. Yeah, that's also good answer. Some other answer to that question would be being daring, not afraid to try, taking initiative, facing the unknown, experiencing new things, knowing oneself, asserting your needs, feeling a sense of internal security, and so on. So, yeah. So let's try to see what emotional intelligence can do to help us gain with self-confidence. Yes, we all want to improve our self-confidence. So let's see how emotional intelligence can help. So first, I wanted to give you that. Daniel Goleman says, in managerial positions, emotional intelligence plays a role in 85% of success. Actually, this is a lot more than technical and intellectual capacities. So emotional intelligence plays a huge role in managerial positions and in self-confidence. So let's see what emotional intelligence is. It's a concept based on the recognition, use, understanding, and management of one's own emotional states and those of others to solve problems and regulate emotionally related behavior, both in the personal and professional spheres. So it's actually a concept proposed in 1990 by psychologists Peter Salovey and John Mayer. And it's a concept we can use in the professional and in the personal world. In the professional world, particularly, emotions are present in all human activities. And this notion is closely linked to the field of management and more particularly to leadership, HR, entrepreneurship, negotiation. So emotion intelligence tells us there are 24 emotional skills, and they are classified in 5 groups. You can see those 5 groups right now. So first is self-awareness. So this is the first group of emotion. And in self-awareness, you have, for example, self-confidence. Second one is empathy. Third one is self-control, motivation, and social skills. And you can see that some of the skills can help us to gain self-confidence. One of them is self-confidence, but other one may help us to get more self-confidence. So now let's see concretely how to do it, how to become more self-confident. So we are gonna give you 5 secret ingredients to develop self-confidence. The first one will be listing your personal strengths, then listing your skills, then acknowledge your weaknesses, identify areas for development, and to finish, complete a self-awareness tool like an Ikigai. And Nicole will start with listing your personal strengths.
So, as Eleanor just mentioned, it's essential that we be aware of this need for emotional intelligence in order to feel confident in our navigation of personal and professional relationships and situations. So let's talk about how we become aware. So there are many tools for kind of assessing our personal strengths. And when we talk about personal strengths, we're talking about the innate kind of aspects of our personalities that we can play to that enable us to be successful. So one of the more common personality assessment tools is called the MBTI, which you may have heard of, the Myers-Briggs Personality Test. And tests like the Myers-Briggs kind of give you a score on a scale. And in the case of the Myers-Briggs, most of the elements are kind of dual. So here we'll look at the example of extroversion versus introversion. So if you think of kind of your strengths along those lines, you can think, oh, I tend to be a more extroverted person. What would that look like if I had to list strengths? Okay, so extroverts, for example, are considered to be very dynamic. They are easy to get to know. They're people of action. They're always busy doing things. They tend to be very energetic and they enjoy sharing their ideas, debate, discussion. They love to have conversations with others, and it's very easy for them to kind of make friends and establish contact. On the other end of the scale, we'd have something called introversion, where the strengths, if you find yourself on the introvert side of the scale, look a little bit different. So they might relate to being able to focus very well, to work very deeply on an issue, problem, or finding a solution. Capacity to reflect, to be calm, to be profound or deep in your thinking and speaking, to have a good choice of words, and also to be able to develop very deep and meaningful relationships. So this is an example of kind of using a duality and a scale to kind of assess where you fall and see what would be the natural kind of strengths that you have. And it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. It's just a matter of knowing yourself and knowing what the strengths are associated with your particular personality. Another example of a tool that you could use is by the VIA Institute, and it looks at 24 different personal strengths. And they kind of group them according to 6 kind of focus areas. So wisdom and knowledge, which is how you learn and how you share information, courage, how you take action, humanity, how you relate to others, justice, how you make judgments, temperance, which is again a relational element, and then lastly, transcendence, how we perceive the world around us and how we engage with the world around us. So these tools, so the MBTI as well as the VIA Institute assessment, are just 2 examples of things that you could use to build your self-confidence. And that starts with knowing yourself. So here on the screen, we have several more that we could recommend. So we already discussed the Myers-Briggs, which is number 1 here on the screen, and the VIA Character Strength Survey, which is in the position number 5. But there are many others. There's hundreds, possibly thousands of tests that you could take. Some of them, and it might be interesting for you female leaders on the call, relate specifically to leadership or entrepreneurship or change management, a lot of things that maybe you don't feel that you have full self-awareness on. And so the Wealth Dynamics profile is a great one for entrepreneurs. The 5-0B can be a great one for those leading teams. The change indicator assessment can be a really good one if you're going through some sort of transformation, but you can find many, many paid and free online. So then we'll talk about now strengths. We've just talked about kind of innate character strengths or personality traits. Now we'll talk a little bit about skills. So when we say skills, we're thinking about a way of doing things. So when you frame this particular list, you want to think verbs, what you do or how you do it. So the first category are cognitive traits. This is the way you actually think. What makes the way you think about things different from other people? So that can be, you find it very easy to conceptualize possibilities. You're a visionary in that regard. You find it very easy to manage complexity and ambiguity. It's very easy for you to come up with many different ideas, so you're very innovative in your thinking. Or you are able to make decisions quickly and sometimes without having all the necessary information. Behavioral traits, for example, might be that you're very adaptable. You find it fairly easy to adapt to constant changes. You find it easy to move between different teams and collaborate with different types of people. It's very easy for you to express appreciation or to value the contributions of others. And for others of you, it may be very easy to prototype. You're one of those people that's constantly inventing. You don't have an issue with trying and failing and trying again. That's a gift, and so you define it in this traits category. And lastly, in the traits category, we'll look at emotional traits. So this is your tolerance for risk and ambiguity. Some people, it might be demonstrating resilience, showing courage to question the way things are done, or having the courage and confidence to lead change. So here you want to always think, when you're making this list, of how do I do the work that I do? What makes my work effective? Or what do I do that makes me different from other people in the space? So on that note, let's take a moment to reflect. Really quickly, just take a minute to think about your skills, your qualities, your strengths, your traits. Think about whether those thoughts come very easily to your mind. Like, are you a person who can readily list off 10 things that you're very, very good at right now? If you can, you're welcome to share in the chat. All right, and now that you have those in mind and you've thought kind of about what some of them are, we'll share something here. For women, studies have shown that women find it a little bit more challenging than men to share their strengths, to be perceived as being arrogant, overconfident, and we tend to want to be perfect. We tend to be a little bit critical of ourselves. Oh, I know how to do that, but I'm not the best. So I see a note that you can't hear us. This is just a sound check. Can you hear the speakers?
You can write in the chat if you hear us. Okay.
Okay. Good. So just a note. So as I was saying, it can be a challenge sometimes to think objectively of our skills and make a list. So we have proposed a tool here to help you with that. Sometimes it can be beneficial to be very concrete. So here we proposed a tool that anyone could use to begin thinking about their own strengths and qualities and skills, where you would take your role, it could be current or one that you've had in the past, and then you go and you would divide it up by behavior traits. So what was expected in that role? What did you find yourself doing? Were you required to plan? Were you required to lead a team? Were you required to coordinate with others? And then you'd assess whether that was interesting to you and how well you think you did in that particular role. And then from there, you'd say, okay, what were kind of the thinking skills that were required to do that job well? And then you would ask yourself, what are the emotional skills that are required to do that job well? Am I very good at building relationships? Am I a good communicator? Am I very good at suggesting new ideas? Am I the type of person who can stand up to authority no matter what? I can stand on my own. I don't need consensus. All those traits you can begin to think of by linking them to a specific experience that you've had. So now we'll talk about the other side of our personalities. So just like we all have strengths, we all have weaknesses, and Eleanor is going to tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so you listed your personal strengths and skills, but what's also important is to list your weaknesses. And why is this important? Because if you know your weaknesses, you can accept them and you can deal with them. And this actually gives you strength. It gives you peace. It gives you the knowledge of when getting help. It gives you also more confidence when you face difficulties to overcome the difficulties. So it's good to accept your weaknesses. And if you don't, on the opposite, if you don't accept your weaknesses, if you refuse them, it can be stressful. Actually, it really can be a waste of time. And this time you waste, you cannot use it to develop new skills, for example. So the important thing is to list your weaknesses, because before to accept them or refute them, you have to know the weaknesses, to know what are those weaknesses. And just as you took a few minutes, a few seconds to think about your skills, your strengths, take a few moments to think about your weaknesses. What are them? What do those weaknesses impede you to do? If you have difficulties to find these weaknesses, you can answer this question. You can think about a failure, a past error you make involving you personally in the work or even in personal in your personal life. And then you can analyze this situation and look for what impedes you to success. So what was your weakness in this situation? And please be careful when you list your weaknesses, because women actually often tend to devalue their strengths and overestimate their weaknesses. So do not hesitate to ask people to help you. For example, listing both strengths and weaknesses to give you an outside view. Because someone in the chat wrote that it can be really hard to know your strengths and to know also to know your weaknesses. So do not hesitate to ask for help. Actually, it really helps you, I hope.
So we've talked a lot so far about the need for emotional intelligence, the need to be able to understand and list our strengths and our weaknesses. Now that we've talked about that, what are we actually going to do about it? How do we actually move forward once we have developed these lists? And that's what we have on the screen right now. So you want to focus on capitalizing on your strengths and not to spend too much time trying to improve the weaknesses. The goal with weaknesses is to understand where they are and mitigate them with different strategies, but not to spend all our time and energy trying to fix what we perceive as wrong about ourselves. We all have gifts, we all have talents, and if we can find work and purpose that play to those natural gifts and talents, we can be more successful in the long run. So let's look at the first step. So like we talked about, we need to look at the development needs in relation to where you are right now. So is there a new skill I need to learn? Is there a behavior I need to change, mitigate, or do more? So for example, if I am a very strong collaborator, but I am in a role where I am mostly working by myself, is there an opportunity for me to find more opportunities to collaborate with others and play to my strengths? So in terms of tools to do that, there's a lot of different things. Eleanor mentioned that we can ask people. So we've talked about personality tests that you can take online and how you can reflect on your own to look at your experience objectively. But the best feedback are from trusted advisors and colleagues and things like that. So the tools we recommend are, for example, 360-degree feedback, which is a type of performance assessment where you ask for feedback from not just your supervisor, but also your peers and the people who report to you. The other thing you can take a look at is old job descriptions or your current position description. Or you can do an interview with your current or former supervisor and say, you know, I've been working on myself and I'm part of this WIA and Deloitte leadership program. I've done these exercises. Could you give me some feedback on my strengths as you perceive them and my weaknesses and areas that I could improve? So then once you have gathered all the information, you now need to develop a strategy for what you want to change. So how can I now grow in the direction I want to grow? And in what time frame? So this is where things like coaching, working in a paired coaching arrangement where you work with a friend, or finding additional training can be very useful. But we don't want to just be taking training on anything. We want to be strategic in how we approach it and make sure it aligns with your long-term goals. Lastly, we want to make sure that we cement that change, that we secure it and that we anchor it to something. Because I know I can't be the only one who has participated in webinars, training, all sorts of things. And then when I get back to my office, I'm busy, I'm moving quickly, and I struggle to implement the things that I've learned. So here we have some tips for that. So using memory aids, using some sort of reminder, having a poster, a sticker, something on your desk, something in your notebook to remind you of the behavior you want to focus on. And lastly, you can use what they call behavioral triggers. So linking one behavior to another. So for example, if I'm always late for meetings, maybe I set a reminder on my calendar to go off 15 minutes before I actually need to be somewhere, or 5 minutes before I actually need to be somewhere. So as soon as that alarm goes off, I start moving in the direction I need to go. So setting up behavioral triggers can also be a very useful tool. So now I'll turn it over to Eleanor to talk a little bit more about one tool in particular that you can use.
And this tool is Ikigai. So this is the last secret ingredient we are gonna give you to gain self-confidence. So this Ikigai model, Ikigai is actually a philosophy of life. It was rooted in Japan culture, and identifying your Ikigai will give you meaning, more meaning in your life. It will help you connect to your essentials. So in the center of the diagram, there is the Ikigai. That's where you want to go. And it corresponds to a some balance between passion, vocation, mission, and profession. So you have to find this balance. And to find it, you have to identify first what you love. So what do you like? What makes you feel alive? What motivates you when you wake up in the morning? What you want to do? Secondly, what the world needs. So it's what causes are you defending? What kind of world you want to live in? What change do you want to make in the world, in the future for your children, maybe? What is the world you want to live in? Then what you can get paid for, because obviously you need to get money to live and to change the world. So what value do you bring? What activities allow you to earn a living? What services can you offer? And then what you are good at. What are your talents, your gifts, your skills, your assets? what you're good at. And when you connect all of those, you will find finally your ikigai, your balance, and this will help you live serenely in confidence, to be more aligned with yourself, to align, yeah, what you like and what you want to work in, to be more aligned. Yeah.
So that brings us now to the next part of this presentation. So we've talked about knowledge of self being the beginning of wisdom and how that can help build your confidence. So you've studied your strengths, you've studied your weaknesses, you've used the tools, you've engaged with mentors and coaches and supervisors and colleagues to understand what you're good at, what you're passionate about, where you want to work. So what do you do next? So that's what we're talking about here, is how to now develop your assertiveness. So how many of you struggle with saying no? It's a very, very common problem for women. They may be confident, they may be sure of what they want to do, but they find it difficult to say no and to disappoint other people. So here we have a quote by a psychologist and writer who says that to dare to say no to another is to say yes to yourself. And the question here is why that is important to self-confidence. So let's talk about why it is. So if you are confident internally, but you constantly say yes to things that maybe are not your passion, maybe do not play to your strengths, what happens is that the perception of other people about your abilities is diminished. Because you're saying a fake yes is not a real yes, in the sense that they can tell, you know, this maybe isn't your gift, this maybe isn't your passion, your heart might not truly be in it. So we need to know how to say it. So there are a few kind of internal messages and tricks that you can use to become a little bit more comfortable and confident with being more assertive. So the key with being assertive is to remember that the goal is to preserve the relationship. It's not a conflict necessarily. It's a personal position and respect for yourself that's driving you to state your opinion on an issue. So the first point here is that you have the right to think what you're thinking and say what you're thinking, as long as it doesn't offend the person you're talking to. And this caveat of not offending the person you're talking to is not in terms of conflict, and it's not for you to avoid saying no. It means that you approach the communication from a space of positivity, affirmation of yourself, and understanding of yourself, not with the goal to devalue or diminish the other person. The second point is that you'll express your views clearly, convincingly, and firmly. So you want to make sure that whatever your perspective is that you're expressing is clear and firm to the person you're speaking with. The third point is you have the right to refuse a task that is not directly your responsibility or that goes against your interests. That's okay. You know how to set your own limits. Where is the line for you? How far are you willing to go in a certain initiative? And knowing that yourself can help you set the boundary with others. Also, having respect for yourself, knowing that saying no is an act of self-care, is an act of self-respect. And also, once you get good at it, it's easier for you to respect the boundaries of others. Another point, another internal message that sometimes derails us is that you have the right to want what you want and to not want what you don't want, and it's okay to say it. And so now we've talked about a few internal messages that are helpful. We'll give 2 tips on how to actually say it. So the first being something called the broken record technique. And this one might be specifically applicable to women in that you may have to say no more than one time in more than one way. So it might be, I wish I could, but I'm not available. I would love to participate, but I don't have any bandwidth for this at the moment. That sounds like a wonderful initiative, and I'm so sorry I cannot be a part of it. You might have to come up with many different ways to say the same thing so that you can be clear and firm, but also understanding and relational. Another technique is called the fog technique, where you make it very clear that it's not about the initiative or the individual, and also that you want to preserve the relationship, but that the specific thing you're saying no to is necessary for you. So what that might sound like is, it's possible, that's a wonderful idea, that's a wonderful initiative, I'd love to support in another way, or I'm not able to commit at this time, but perhaps in the future, you know, some sort of additional clarification that helps you to get your point across and still preserve the relationship. So a lot of times, saying no can also be a challenge, and you risk offending somebody if we don't frame it the right way. So what's on your screen now are some tips for how to actually frame the sentence to avoid the conflict. And to be totally honest, sometimes you won't be able to avoid a conflict. Sometimes people don't want to hear no, but that's when you fall back on your own self-confidence, your self-respect, your boundaries in order to stand sure and present your point of view in a positive way. So the first point here is exactly what I just mentioned: positive, personalized position. Saying no is an act of self-care and is born out of your own self-awareness and your own needs and objectives. So making sure that you're framing the message in that way can be very important. Number two, an assertive person uses I. So this is where if I want to say no to a certain thing, I don't blame other people. I don't, discredit the idea or the opportunity completely. I'm assured in myself, I'm confident, and I say, I am not able to support this because of X, Y, and Z. I don't blame others. I don't blame the circumstance necessarily. Third, regard. So this is looking the other person in the eye, personalizing the relationship. And lastly, taking responsibility. So realizing that saying no is your choice and you have the control in the situation. And that's very, very important as you kind of message this activity internally to yourself. And we have a quote or a statement here that a person who knows how to say no tactfully and firmly is more respected than those who always say yes, who always nod in agreement with others, but don't mean it. Okay? So now that we've talked about the concepts, Eleanor is going to give us a little bit more information on the how exactly to say it. So I see there are some questions about how exactly to say it, and Eleanor is going to answer those right now.
I will try at least. So we have three secret ingredients, new secret ingredients. First will be assertive affirmation, how to affirm yourself, and then we'll go on. So as Nicole said, to affirm yourself, we have to use this assertive affirmation. You have to be sure of when you want to say yes or when you want to say no. So first tip is to know yourself, what you want. And then we have this nice wheel with some tips to affirm yourself. So use I. Nicole said it already, but it's really important to say I, to say me. It's me talking. It's not us. It's not someone else. It's really me talking. To have clear objectives, to make eye contact. Nicole said it already. Do not feel shy about your position. You decided to say yes or to say no. So make comfortable about this decision. Also see other people as peers, as equals. Dare to ask questions. Don't feel shy about asking questions. Probably if you ask one question, actually, probably someone else has exactly the same question. So yeah, assertiveness truly allows you to be yourself in your communication and also to be good at your communication. So that was first one, and then saying no does not harm people. You have to be clear about that. You will not harm people if you say no to something. On the contrary, actually, it will give you respect from others because you dare saying your opinion. So assert yourself clearly without judgment. Use sentences such as I liked it, I didn't like it, always with this I. It's you talking. You're talking about your feelings. You were liking it or you didn't like something. So it cannot be wrong or it cannot be false because it's your feeling. So no one can say it's not true. Then you can say, I'm disappointed about blah, blah, blah. It has been pleasant and pleasant for me. This is acceptable, not acceptable for me. I felt embarrassed. I was embarrassed by something. I was injured by something. I thought it was interesting, and so on. So yeah, assertiveness is really the act of defending your rights, and again, without harming others. It will not harm others if you say no. And the last tip is about words to avoid, because actually you used the I because you didn't want to include, you wanted, I mean, to include, no, you didn't want, sorry, to include judgment. You wanted to say your point of view and not anyone's point of view. So you have to do the same with other people. So try to avoid some words such as always, not enough, never, as usual, again, too much, because these are strong words and judging words. For example, as usual, it might be usual for you, but maybe it's not usual for anybody else. Always, but maybe it's not always like that for other people. So try to avoid this kind of words, and it will, avoid judgments. Again, you will express your feeling, and without assuming everyone is thinking the same as you. It will help you establish a good relationship and keep a good relationship in your personal or professional life. And I will give the answer back to Nicole.
Yes. So I see there are some very interesting comments in the chat, and I think some of the chat comments are really getting to the heart of what we're talking about today. I struggle giving bad news to people. I'm scared to disappoint people. I find it difficult to disappoint other people. But on the flip side, Dami Lola shared her experience. And I think this really highlights the importance of this part of the session. I'm learning how to say no, and I realize I am more happy. Saying yes to myself helps me to put myself first, which is important to me and my confidence. So I think that really gets at the heart of what we're discussing. If you can't say no, how can you work on the priorities we talked about in the beginning? How can you be playing to your strengths, following your strategy and achieving your goals if you have no time, if you're constantly saying yes to things that don't serve you? And so it's not to say that we want to disappoint people and we want to hurt others, but we need to understand how we can positively assert ourselves, how we can express what we need, how we can still maintain the relationships and be confident in expressing what we want. And I think that's a unique challenge that women face in the workplace and that we actually have to practice. It's a skill like any other. We can build it, we can learn it, and that's why we're here in this session today. But, so I see there is another question here. It is said that no is a complete sentence on its own. I'd like to ask, do we really have to qualify our no's? That's a great question. So a lot of what we're talking about are just tips. And everyone will have to develop their own personal flavor and their own personal style to how they say no. Some people, depending on your personality, like we talked about in the very beginning, it's very easy for you to give an unqualified no, I'm not doing it. For other people, depending on their personality, their relationships, and how they navigate, it might be a lot harder. And so each person has to kind of come up with their own approach. We're just giving some examples for if you really struggle with saying no, how to just take the first step, how to begin the sentence, how to frame it to give you the best chance of success. And sometimes, if we're being totally honest, you can share in the chat. Sometimes you'll say no and people will not appreciate it. And that's okay. And that's where you have to go back to the beginning of this conversation and say, this does not serve me. These are my strengths. How can we come up with a win-win solution based on my strengths? How can we come up with a way that you get what you want, but I'm also being true to myself? So great question. So thank you very much. I see there are a few other questions. So actually now we've reached the point in the conversation where we can take questions. So I'll put the two we have for you up on the screen, but I'll also take a few from the chat. We have about 10 minutes left. So the first question here, as indicated, we should not focus on our weaknesses. However, as an entrepreneur, it's important to be able to take risks. My weakness is a low risk appetite. Is this not a skill I should focus on? So that's a great question. So when we say don't focus on weaknesses, we mean the strategy should not be to dedicate all your time and energy to improving a weakness. You should be aware of the weakness, and it sounds like you are. You're able to articulate it very well here. You're aware of the weakness, and you put in place a strategy to manage it. So in this case, you're aware that you have a low risk appetite, but it's necessary for you to take risks in order to grow as a business person. So maybe in that scenario, your strategy would be, I'm going to work with a mentor who has a big risk appetite, who will push me and give me objective feedback on when I'm being overly cautious. That's just one example. There could be many other different solutions, but that's just one example of how you could handle managing the weaknesses side of things. I'm going to take another question here.
Yeah, we have a few questions about what words to avoid or how to be nice when saying no.
How to be nice, the female handcuffs of niceness, as we say. That's definitely a struggle, and it will very much depend on your culture. So there's nothing I could say that would apply in all cultures and all scenarios. There's no magic sauce in that regard. So I think there's a lot of, we only have an hour in this session, but there's a lot of kind of resources you can find on how to say no. A really great book that I read recently called Tribe of Mentors actually had examples of people saying no to being in the book, where they had lots of different styles. So looking for examples, reading examples until you find something that's comfortable for you. Also, another really good tip for practice is working on it in low pressure situations. So practicing saying no to little things before you start saying no to big things, if you're a person who struggles with that. So that could mean, you practice with your family. Oh, I don't want to go to this event, or with your friends, and just try out different messaging approaches to find something that works for you. Sometimes a person's strength may be interpreted as weakness. How do you respond to that? So something, we should probably add this as a slide, but one thing you can't control in this scenario is the reaction and perception of other people. I think we talked about getting feedback from peers and leaders and colleagues, and that will be one way to kind of check, are your strengths or weaknesses being perceived a certain way that maybe you're not aware of. But in that scenario, it's really just about validating your feelings with other people. So maybe I feel like I'm a very confident person. Maybe I feel like I take charge of situations and I know exactly what I'm doing. But when I ask my colleagues, or I ask my trusted advisors or friends, they said, well, the way you communicate or the way you do things, rubs people the wrong way in this particular aspect, or maybe you're not coming across as confident as you intend to be because of how you say certain things. It will be different depending on the person, but I think it's a mix of self-reflection and getting feedback from other people who you can trust, not anybody, but other people who you can trust in order to build the perspective. So thank you for that question. I hope that was helpful. We have a few other questions coming in the chat.
Yeah, we have a question about how to overcome, in your opinion, public speaking fear. And actually, we will have a webinar on this subject, and this will be in August. I think we will have to check, but you got the invitation normally with all the dates, so there will be actually a webinar just on that subject.
Mm-hmm. And there was another question also that we'll also cover later in the series. So someone had asked if I'm missing out on great opportunities. I'm afraid that when I say no, I'm missing out on great opportunities. How do I get rid of this feeling? So we'll have a session on career management. How do you prioritize? How do you decide what to say yes to? How do you decide what opportunities serve you as an individual? And how can you find win-win solutions? So if your boss asks you to do something and maybe you're not as excited about it as they are, how do you manage that? How do you navigate that? How do you find the advantage in every situation? Come back for career management, because we can't talk about that today. We only have 5 minutes left. Okay, so we should use I instead of we for assertiveness. As leaders, we're advised to use we. Can we clarify this? So that's a really, really great question. I think when we talk about, in this context, we're talking about building self-confidence and communication on an interpersonal level as an individual, not necessarily your communication when you're speaking on behalf of a group. So if you're leading as a CEO and you're talking about commitments that your organization has made, that would be a slightly different set of communication tools that you would need depending on your goal and your strategy. Eleanor, did you have something on that? So that's a tricky question. So then we're getting more into the communications realm, the strategic communications realm, how you frame things as a leader, which is a little bit different from what we're talking about today. But a great question. We will also
have a webinar on leadership.
Yes.
So maybe we will try to answer this question in the webinar, maybe.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And please feel free. I know we're kind of in the details, but in the last 4 minutes, if you could also in the chat share with us your suggestions for how we can improve this program, how we can continue to build on this initiative, please do just type it in the chat so we can have a record of that, and we'll review it and make sure we integrate it for the next session. All right. So is it possible to be both an introvert and an extrovert? So that's another great question. So yes, any combination of things is possible. A lot of these personality tests will frame things as black and white. That's not necessarily the case. Many, many people are on a spectrum. Also, people change and people grow, and you're allowed to do that. And it's, you know, a great thing. And hopefully as you go through this program, you'll also grow. And so, yes, there are definitely people who are ambiverts who find it very easy to go back and forth and kind of switch between traits and skills. If you do a little more study on the type of tests that we talked about at the beginning of the session, some of these things, when you are operating in a space of your weaknesses or using traits that are not innate to you, the cost is not that you can't do it. There are some people who do it very, very well. The cost is the amount of energy it takes for you to operate in one way versus another. So if you are naturally an introvert and you're playing an extrovert, it takes a lot more energy than if you were to just naturally kind of operate in a space that let you express your introvert tendencies. I hope that's clear. All right, so we're running out of time, so we'll take just 2 more questions and then go from there. So it would be nice if some questions are answered, even if other questions are answered. Okay, so being able to take more questions that are a little bit tailored to specific scenarios. We hear you on that. How would you think? Okay, and then another, I think we'll take this as the final question. How would you say no if you are asked to do something in front of people that you are not comfortable with? So that's another very, very good question. And I think that's where you can maybe use some of the fog technique, where you say something like, you know, that's a really great initiative. That's a very good idea. That's a wonderful opportunity. Let me think about it and get back to you. Or that's a great idea. Maybe this person that I can propose would be a better fit, or would be a great fit for the opportunity that you have. So that would be one example of how you can handle that. But I see there's lots of wonderful suggestions for how we can improve the session. So collecting expectations at the beginning, that's a great idea. Focusing on the practical, that's a great idea. And then, so before you go, I'll definitely say we will share a recording of the session. Leah will share the link. I think it will be posted on YouTube. So look out for that email. And also on the screen in front of you, right before we wrap up, I've shared Eleanor and my contact information. So if you do have any questions, if you'd like to participate in other programs like this in the future, please do reach out. We have an incredible training team here. Thank you so much for your participation. Thank you so much for your energy and your questions. It's been a really wonderful session. These sessions will be held monthly until the end of the year. So we look forward to seeing you again and hopefully integrating your feedback as we go. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great afternoon, evening, night, wherever you happen to be.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.